Thank you so much, Judy. Those were very important words, and we're really honored that you were able to take time out of your busy life to come and share with us. Thank you very much. So you've had a chance to read what I put up there, and that's essentially how this knowledge system works. It's every group of people has their own knowledge that goes with their own culture and their own place in the land. But when you put it all together, it makes this amazing mosaic of different knowledge systems that all go together and feed each other and support each other. But we'll just carry on and sort of take this idea of traditional knowledge systems and think about all of the different species and the different elements of the environment. That for Indigenous societies, it's very clear that these other elements, the non-human life forms that surround us, are our relatives, are our kin. And that's what the notion kin-centric ecology is. And it's very common for Indigenous peoples from around the world. I'm reading a dissertation right now from an Indigenous person from Australia, and the philosophy that she discusses in her thesis is very, very similar to what Mary would have taught us about our responsibility to the other species that we depend on, and we shouldn't think of them as just things to use, but they're other beings that have their own societies. So, okay, here we are. And so, the sockeye, for example, they're not just a fish, they're our relatives. And Mary used to talk about them as beings that came up the river and sacrificed each other for the good of their babies, to enable them to come up and spawn, and then they pass on. And her granny used to treat them with such respect and would carefully go and push the dead salmon from the edge of the salmon river into the water so that they would nourish the next generation. So what if not just people, but all the trees, the flowers, the animals, birds, and fish are viewed as our neighbors and our relatives with their own needs? We would think about them in a different light. If we go into our grandmother's home, we don't throw things around and trample mud all over the place and rip up the curtains. We treat it with a lot of care and respect. If we think about our relatives' homes out there, we walk carefully and we treat it with respect. So that is what, when Bonnie said, Ethel said, all my relations, that's what it means. It's not just your human relations, your human neighbors, but it's all my relations. And we're all together, we're all part of the same family. Even the mountains and the rivers and the waters are part of that. Okay. And Mary used to talk about that, and this is a quote from up to a tree or a shrub. She acknowledged that particular tree like it was a human being. Okay. And her mom, Christine Allen, used to, even when she was in her late 90s, when they'd give her just a gift of some wild strawberries, she never would just eat them. She would always say, "Cuics chamach, cuics chamach, cuics chamach." Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then she would eat them and really enjoy them. But always there was that acknowledgement and appreciation to the gifts that she was given. And even another just part of the story of Mary's knowledge about harvesting the birch trees, she would always warn people, you just cut a little ways into the outer bark. Don't cut down to the wood or you'll kill the tree, you'll hurt the tree. you just take the outer bark off, and that's how you've seen the birch bark baskets that she's made and that her family still makes. You don't hurt the tree. The life of the birch tree matters. If you need to kill a tree, say for making a canoe or for making a house or something, you don't just take the life needlessly, but you're very, very careful. And you talk to the tree and explain why you need it, how you're going to transform it into another phase of its life, and that kind of thing. So it's a reciprocity. You never take the other species for granted, and you always feel a responsibility to them, appreciation, and always you give back. You don't just take, you give back. I've heard that from many, many elders. So, this is the beginning of the story. It sort of takes it up at midpoint. This is from a couple weeks ago when we were down at the Salmon River estuary, and this is Anne Garibaldi. And she's looking very happy. In fact, I have another picture of her like this, which I didn't use, but she's pointing out this wonderful plant, kokolos, or the Sagittaria, the wapato, or arrowhead it's called. It's a traditional root vegetable whose tubers were dug and eaten long ago. And Mary remembered going down there with her granny. And her granny would wade in the water and dig up the tubers. They're about the size of a chestnut. And the kids, she'd throw them onto the bank, and the kids would gather them up, put them in a basket, and they'd take them home and have a wonderful feed. And there was another root called atsmuts, the water parsnip, they used to gather as well. Just shake off in the water. It was clean enough then, and just eat them raw, like a carrot. Well, when Anne Garibaldi started to work with Mary, she told us there's no more kokolots down there. It's all gone. And she told us the delta has changed. There's lots of cattails. The blackbirds' songs were deafening. There were so many red-winged blackbirds down there living in the cattails, and they're all gone now. And so mint and some of the other plants, she talked about the changes that she'd seen down there in her lifetime. And so Anne set about to try to help figure out how to restore the kokolots down there. And the next slide. There it is. That's what the tubers look like. And that's Jotama, Ron and Mary Ann's son, who's now quite a bit older and probably taller than me, but holding one of the shoots. Okay. And this is what Mary talked about. The bulrushes are gone. The areas are just disappearing. There's no more life left down there. So that was what Anne had to work with. And she did some experiments, and she and Lorna and some of the other family members planted wapato back in certain areas and protected them a little. Okay? That's just her other observation. She used to say, everything is changing and it's not for the good. And the reason why? All of these different impacts, cumulative impacts they would be called, building the railroad and the changing the course of the river from that, and the highway, and changing the river channel for building the marina, and grazing cattle, and of course the introduced species that have come in, like the carp. All of these things impacted the original species there. Okay, so that's when Anne decided to try to help restore the wapato. And guess what? Next slide. So there they are, the wapato. You can't see them too well, but I have a few more photos for you. First of all, this is our clan, a lot of us, not everyone, but the group that met to go down and survey around the delta and look at the wapato. And there's Val and Bonnie and Anne. And we saw a lot of the plants that Mary talked about. All of these plants have cultural importance of one sort or another. You might have remembered the photo of the willow bark dolls made from the green willow bark. The hazelnuts grow down there. Okay. And the cascara tree, which Mary took as a medicine, latch onto your clothes. Okay. A lot of unusual organisms like the fungi we saw down there, and a tiny little plant growing in the mud, a liverwort that I had identified as a riccia, and quite an unusual plant. Okay. A few interesting exotics. There's some grapes growing down there, and also a wild cucumber. There are only 2 plants that are listed in E. Flora BC in the cucumber family, Cucurbitaceae. And this one is one of them, and the manroot is the other that grows along the coast. And Nielsen, I found one last night, an actual cucumber. So, what's this leaf? Yeah, it's the biggest cottonwood leaf I've ever seen. Bonnie's holding it. It's about that long. Okay, and there's a beautiful, big, old-growth great-grandfather cottonwood down there with an eagle nest in the top. Bonnie's standing beside it. You can see how big it is. And across the river, right across the river, is the proposed development site, which they say is not in a floodplain. It's not flooded, ever. It's hard to believe, given what plants are growing there. And along the railway right-of-way, I was thrilled to see this plant, the spatsen, because Mary used to talk about that and how the kids used to help their grannies bring the bundles of spatsen, that's called Indian hemp or hemp dogbane, to a place where they would take the fiber off, and then that's what they used for string and for fish nets. So there it was, growing. There's the fiber, a mat woven with some of the hemp, and a fish net. Those are Ntlakatmuch objects, but the Switzmalph people made them as well. Okay? The hawthorn. In the other room, there's a beautiful digging stick that Mary had made, and it's made of hawthorn wood, a very tough wood. We have 2 native hawthorns here, and this is the red one. So we saw that down there, lots of hawthorn. And Bonnie mentioned the fence. There it is, and you can see the flooding that took place last winter because you can see the debris hung up in the top wire of the fence. That's how high and higher how the floodwaters were last winter. And we saw along the edge where the fence had kept the cattle out a growth of burr reed, along with the very invasive reed canary grass, which is thriving down there. Okay. And here's just a few photos of the Wapato. I was so thrilled to see it. I took quite a few photos. There it is, just along the edge there. The railroad is in the back, beyond the pond. Sorry, Alex, I had to put that picture in. He's thrilled by it too, you can tell. There's the train going by, Wapato in the foreground. And this is a photo that I took down at the Ridgefield Nature Sanctuary in the Columbia to show what an extensive patch of Wapato looks like. That's what the Delta would have been like originally. So we came to a place where Mary had told Anne they used to sit when she was young, when they went down there by this grove of trees. And guess what we found growing right next to that? We were both thrilled to find sweet flag, the American sweet flag growing right there. And you can see it's been trampled, but it's still there, and it's quite an extensive patch. It's a blue-listed species, which means it's quite unusual. It was collected along Shuswap Lake in 1954, I think at Canoe or somewhere, but it hasn't been noted from this spot. We also found stinging nettles, and this is one of the fiber plants, as well as being used for medicine and as a green vegetable. And we found mint, just a little bit, but just enough, the remnant of what Mary would have remembered as a girl. Okay. Lots of our four-footed relatives down there. We didn't see any while we were there, but we certainly saw the evidence of them. And lots of insect relatives too. And we were really pleased to see this really cute little paddling bird that I was later able to get identified as an immature Sora rail, as well as the killdeer right down at the water's edge, and of course lots of Canada geese. They still give me a thrill when they fly over and they're honking. And of course it's a habitat, it's home for many, many different birds and animals. And there's Anne standing beside an old-growth aspen, big old aspens. I don't know how old they are, but they would have been there when Mary was growing up. So this whole delta area is an example of what I like to call biocultural diversity. It's not just the biological organisms, but the cultural influence that is so interconnected there, there's a history to it of humans being in that environment for thousands of years, literally. You can still see it. But as Mary pointed out, so much has changed, and we've lost a lot of those values in the philosophy that Mary was trying to teach everyone about how to value our relatives. And so we have to think very carefully what kind of future we want. And so it comes down to this beautiful place, this beautiful community with all the beautiful people that I've met here. But what makes it special? Is it this? I think you could take a picture like that in any community across North America. Or is it this? The biological setting for it, the nature and the beauty and the unique plants and animals that you find in this place. And there's Niels walking amongst the willows down there, and another one of the interesting plants that we found down there in the primrose family, loose strife. Not sure. I get it mixed up with another one. There's the flying geese against the mountain. That's what makes Salmon Arm special. Okay? And even we see it. It's recognized. If you go to the Salmon Arm website, they're highlighting the natural beauty. They're highlighting Salmon Arm as a place to go bird watching. You can see the binocular signs along the highway. And they highlight the nature of this area, even in the commercial sense. And so it's the cultural knowledge and values and practices and history that are an important part of this place as well. And I want to acknowledge Bonnie and Jerry and all of your wonderful family and community for all the work that you've done. And so Bonnie talked about some of the restoration activities, and there's Mary's hands with the willow bark. She was making a cattail mat using that willow bark, and there's a couple of the willows that have been restored. There's the reed canary grass, and you can see why it's so easy to spread, because it sprouts up. It's very aggressive. And it is a beautiful grass, but it is invasive, and it's taken over in a lot of areas that used to have other species like wapato and cattail. So I think that's the message that I want to leave you with, that I think all of you embrace as well, is that we all have things to teach each other. We all have ways of helping each other. And when we think of each other, we need to think of not just our human neighbours, our human relatives, but all of the others as well. And they have a lot to teach us as well. So, thank you very much.